1,000 years old, still standing, still rising from the sea. A granite rock 60 meters tall, sitting in the middle of one of the most dangerous tidal bays in the world. On top of that rock, an abbey complex built upward over 10 centuries. Church on top of monastery, on top of fortress, on top of village, reaching a total height of 157 meters from the tidal flat to the tip of the spire. Mont-Saint-Michel was not supposed to be buildable. The rock is too small to support the structure above it. The tides come in too fast to safely supply a construction site. The ground beneath the foundations is not rock. It is sand, constantly shifted by water, that can rise 15 meters in under 6 hours. And here is what makes this different from every other building in this series. Yet the sea never stopped fighting it. Notre Dame had a fire after 800 years. The Florence Dome had a ceiling open to the sky for decades while builders argued. The Hagia Sophia had earthquakes. Mont-Saint-Michel had all of those problems, every day, from the moment the first stone was laid. And the builders did not engineer around the sea. They built with it. There is one structural decision made by the builders of Mont-Saint-Michel in the 13th century that modern engineers describe as one of the most audacious foundation choices in the history of medieval construction. A decision that should not have worked, that engineers looking at it today say they would not have recommended. And it has held for 800 years. We get to it. But first, where this place came from. Normandy, 708 AD. The Bay of Mont-Saint-Michel at low tide looks like another world. The water retreats 4 kilometers from shore, leaving an expanse of wet sand that stretches in every direction, flat, grey, almost featureless. In the distance, barely visible in the Atlantic haze, a rock rises from the sand, like something the sea left behind. This rock is called Mont Tombe. It is not connected to the mainland. At high tide, it is surrounded by water. At low tide, you can walk to it, if you know the paths. The sand looks firm. Much of it is not. The bay conceals quicksand, hidden channels, and a tidal surge that medieval chroniclers described as arriving faster than a galloping horse. People die crossing this bay. They have always died crossing it. The Bishop of Avranches, a man named Aubert, what is said to have received a vision in 708. The Archangel Michael appearing 3 times, pressing a burning finger into his skull, commanding him to build a sanctuary on the rock. The skull of Aubert is preserved at the Basilica in Avranches today. It has a hole in it. Whether the hole is the mark of an archangel or an injury from another cause, the historians leave to the historians. What is certain is this. Aubert built a small oratory on the rock in 708, and that act of construction on an island of granite surrounded by one of the most dangerous tidal environments in Europe, set in motion 1,000 years, of building that would produce one of the most structurally extraordinary complexes in the medieval world. Now, the problem. The problem at Mont-Saint-Michel is not one problem. It is 3, layered on top of each other, so each one made worse by the others. The first is the rock itself. Granite is strong. Granite can support enormous loads. But the peak of the Mont-Saint-Michel rock is not flat. It is a pointed summit, roughly conical, with steep slopes falling away in every direction. You cannot build a large church on a cone. You need a flat platform, which means you have to create one. The second problem is the tides. The tides in the Bay of Mont-Saint-Michel are among the largest in Europe, among the largest in the world. The difference between low and high water can reach 15 meters. The speed of the incoming tide across the flat of the bay can exceed the speed of a person running. The window between tides during which the site can be safely accessed from the mainland is narrow, and changes every day. Every stone that went into Mont-Saint-Michel had to be transported across that bay, or by boat during high tide, within that window. Every delivery of lime for mortar, every shipment of timber for scaffolding, every cartload of sand was subject to tides that did not care about construction schedules. The third problem is the foundation. Granite sits underneath. But the granite summit is not large enough to support the footprint of the buildings the abbots wanted to construct. As the complex grew over the centuries, abbey church above, monastic buildings surrounding, fortifications below, the builders needed to extend the platform outward beyond the natural edge of the rock. Extending outward meant building foundations on the slopes of a granite hill above tidal water in sand. This should not work. And this is the decision that modern engineers find difficult to accept. The solution the medieval builders chose, and refined over 3 centuries of construction, was to build directly on the granite slopes using a system of interlocked crypts and supporting halls that served simultaneously as foundation, structure, and usable space. They did not try to reach bedrock through the sand. They built structures whose base was the granite hillside itself, using the natural geometry of the rock as a foundation platform and extending outward from that platform on arches and vaulted halls that distributed the weight of everything above them across as much rock surface as possible. The result, from the outside, looks like the abbey grew out of the mountain, because structurally, it did. The most remarkable example of this is a group of 3 buildings constructed on the north face of the rock in the early 13th century, between 1211 and 1228, under the abbacy of Raoul des Îles and his successor. They called it La Merveille, the marvel. Stand below the north face of the Mont today and look up. What you see is a wall of granite rising almost vertically from the tidal flat. 60 meters high, pierced at intervals with narrow windows, buttressed at its base by massive projecting piers that anchor it to the slope below. It looks like a cliff that was built rather than formed. Inside, the marvel is 3 stories of interlocking spaces. 2 separate buildings sitting side by side, each 3 stories tall, connected at every level by passages and shared walls. The lowest level contains the almonry and cellar. The middle level contains the great hall for guests and the scriptorium where monks copied manuscripts. The top level, sitting at the highest point accessible without entering the church itself, contains the refectory and the cloister. The cloister is worth pausing on. It is a garden courtyard surrounded by a covered walkway, open to the sky, positioned at the edge of a cliff face 60 meters above the sea. The columns that line the walkway are set in a double row in a pattern slightly offset from course to course. No column in one row aligns directly with a column in the row behind it. This is not decorative arrangement. It distributes the load from the roof above across twice as many support points, allowing the columns themselves to be made slimmer without reducing the strength of the structure. And the builders of the marvel understood intuitively what structural engineers call redundancy, the property of a system where no single point of failure can bring down the whole. They designed it into a cloister walkway while standing on a cliff above the Atlantic. Now, the stone. Where does the granite come from? Some of it comes from the rock itself, blocks cut directly from the summit and used in place, reducing the weight of material that had to be transported. But the granite of the summit is not always the right type for fine cutting. Much of the stone for the marvel and the abbey church came from the Chorzy Islands, a small archipelago 11 kilometers into the Atlantic. The builders of Mont-Saint-Michel quarried their building material from an island in the open sea and transported it by boat, across open water, and through tidal currents to a landing point on the shore of the bay, before it could even begin the journey to the construction site. Think about what a bad day looked like on that supply chain. A tidal window missed. A boat loaded with stone blocks delayed at the Chawsey quarry by weather. A delivery that should have arrived at the base of the Mont on Wednesday arriving instead on Friday, when the tidal window had shifted, meaning the cart that would carry it to the base of the rock had to wait in the mud for the tide to turn again. On a construction site with no refrigerated food storage, no synthetic clothing, no weather forecasting beyond reading the sky, delays like this were not unusual. They were the rhythm of the work. The workers who built Mont-Saint-Michel did not fight the tides. They read them. They organized their days around them. They knew which windows were safe and which were not. They knew which channels in the bay were firm and which were not. This knowledge was not written in any manual. It was accumulated through experience, transmitted from one generation of workers to the next, and it was as essential to the construction as any knowledge of how to cut stone. Here is the detail that stops people. The mortar used in the marvel and the abbey church was mixed with seawater. Fresh water was scarce on the rock. Carrying enough fresh water from the mainland to mix mortar for a construction project of this scale was impractical. The builders used what was available. Seawater mortar performs differently from freshwater mortar. The salt content affects the curing process, the long-term behavior of the lime, or the way the joints absorb and release moisture through the seasons. Medieval builders who worked primarily on mainland sites did not use seawater mortar. The builders of Mont-Saint-Michel had to develop specific knowledge of how to work with it, how thick to mix it, how long to let it cure before loading the joints, how to protect fresh mortar from the spray during high wind. This knowledge was local, specific to this site. It was not taught at any mainland workshop. You learned it here or you did not learn it at all. And it worked. The mortar joints in the walls of the marvel, 800 years after they were laid by hand in a clifftop wind, are still intact. Now, the near disaster that most visitors never know happened. In the late 11th century, and during the construction of the Romanesque abbey church that preceded the Gothic additions of the marvel, the builders made a decision that was bold and, in retrospect, almost catastrophic. They decided to build the nave of the church directly over three crypts: the Aquilon, the Promenoir, and the St. Martin Chapel, using the roofs of those lower spaces as the platform for the church floor above. For nearly 2 decades, the construction proceeded. The walls of the nave rose. The weight of stone accumulating above the crypts increased year by year. And then a section of the north wall began to move. Not collapse, not dramatically crack. Move. A slow, measurable outward lean that showed up first as a widening joint in the masonry, then as a visible tilt in the wall face. The weight above was exceeding what the crypt structures below could safely transfer to the granite slopes. The builders did not stop construction. They reinforced. Additional buttressing was added to the exterior of the north wall. The geometry of the crypt structure below was modified to improve load transfer. Work continued on the floor above while repairs proceeded below, the same kind of simultaneous correction that characterized the flying buttress problem at Notre Dame, where the building was fixed while it was still being built. The north wall stabilized, and the knowledge learned from that near failure was incorporated into every subsequent phase of construction, most directly into the design of the marvel, built a century and a half later. Where the decision to use interlocking supporting halls as a foundation system was a direct response to what the earlier builders had learned about how weight traveled through stone on an unstable slope. They did not solve the problem perfectly the first time. They solved it well enough to survive. Then they solved it better. There is something about this place that no structural analysis can fully account for. Mont-Saint-Michel was not built by a single architect with a single plan. It was built across 10 centuries by dozens of abbots, hundreds of master craftsmen, and thousands of workers whose names are almost entirely unrecorded. Each generation inherited a partially built thing with known strengths and known weaknesses, and each generation added to it based on what they understood and what they had learned from what had gone wrong before. The result is not a unified architectural statement. It is a conversation, a 1,000-year conversation between builders and a rock, between construction and tide, between human ambition and the specific, irreducible resistance of this particular place. Step inside the cloister at the top of the marvel on a clear day. The garden is small. The whole space would fit inside a modest house. But the columns around it frame the sky above and the sea below in a way that is unlike anything else. The sound of the Atlantic is constant. You can feel the wind even in the shelter of the walkway, and the stone under your feet, under the piers, under the foundations you are standing on. That stone has been carrying this building above the tide line for 800 years. The men who mix that seawater mortar are gone. The men who read the tidal windows and organize the stone deliveries from the Chauzy Islands are gone. The men who watched the North Wall begin to lean and decided to fix it without stopping work are gone. What remains is what they left. A building that should not exist. On a rock that should not support it. Above a sea that has spent 1,000 years trying to reclaim what was taken from it. These men did not build Mont-Saint-Michel for themselves. The work of any single generation was too small a fraction of the whole to be individually visible. No one who set the first stones of the marvel lived to see the cloister above it finished. No one who cut granite at the Chauzy quarry in 1211 knew what the building would eventually become. They built for a future they would never see, stone by stone, tide by tide. And against every tide that has come since, it is still there,